Welcome again to Lessons for Life. As it's been Easter Sunday, we are talking the Easter Rising, which was a sacrifice by the Irish Republican movement in 1916 to strike a blow for Irish independence. It, they say it was a military failure, but in reality, it was a successful sacrifice. And Brian, you were just telling me the significance of it being Easter time and that being synonymous with the sacrifice of Jesus.
I don't think there's any doubt about it that people like specifically Patrick Pearse and the more like members of the leadership were that Easter was in their mind, rebirth, reincarnation, the resurrection of an old idea of Ireland in the midst of an international calamity, the World War One and all that was happening there. So I very early on, I'd say they knew they would never succeed outright. They had hopes of it succeeding,
and these people
whatever
were intellectuals, right, Brian? They were intellectuals. They were revolutionaries. So I think some of them were lawyers and teachers.
Very large mixed group, yeah.
And even mixed in terms of religious background. I know Roger Casement had a Protestant background. Thomas Clark also. I think even Patrick Pearse might have had a father of the Unitarian faith. So there were different religious backgrounds to these people. It wasn't a Catholic uprising as such, although it drew on the Easter symbolism, and also equally would have had parallels with the Bolshevik movement being a socialist movement, being kind of secular in a way. So there's lots of different identities and ideologies coming into play there.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. Like, I mean, a large segment of the force in 1916 would have been the Citizens' Army, which was James Connolly's militia. But they would have been in the minority in terms of the overall Irish volunteers. So politically, and Connolly talks about that. He said, if we do win this particular battle against the British, that they need to hold on to their rifles, that they may need to use their rifles in the coming civil war.
So he could see the civil war was coming after this anyway. Because Ireland did descend into, for those that don't know, after the blow for independence that was struck in 1916 and the executions that happened, and then the War of Independence, you had this split between people that wanted to go on and fight for full independence and those that were ready to accept the treaty. And you go into further detail if you've got time. But James Connolly could see that this sacrifice would lead to a schism between the Irish Republicans themselves. Okay.
Absolutely. And it did come to pass, just as you described. You had on one side of the Republican movement, during the Civil War, which, we're getting off topic, but it is relevant. You did have the Soviets and you had the Workers' Republic. And on the other side, you had the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. You had the British-backed Free State. So it was already there in a kind of in a microcosm in Dublin, but at that stage, it didn't come to blows between themselves because they were unified in their common cause for that day. I mean, it was bound to fail. But it was definitely bound to fail and they knew this very early on. They knew that the weapons ship had been intercepted and it had been scuttled. They knew without those weapons, they knew also that because the order for the volunteers to come out in different parts of the country hadn't gone out, had been countermanded by McNeill, that it was going to be a disaster.
Where were the weapons coming from, Brian?
The weapons were coming in from Germany.
Okay. So, and who was it said that Ireland's opportunity is Britain's, or what did they say? Britain's problem is Ireland's opportunity.
I think that was. I'm almost certain it was Pierce, but I can't say it off the top of my head. There was numerous events that kind of brought Ireland to that point. But like Ireland, you have to kind of look at Ireland being divided into three major groups. You know, you had the loyalists in the north, then you had this kind of
and a few loyalists in the south. You had Carson, that loyalists forget is a Dublin man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lord Carson, the hero of the Ulster Volunteers, was from Dublin, right? And there was even a constituency in Dublin that returned a loyalist vote, I think, at the 1918 general election?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's true. That area of Dublin is still very, well, we call them the West Brit.
Okay.
So before the First World War started, you had the Irish Volunteer Movement, which was set up in opposition to the Ulster Volunteer Movement. And this movement was quite large, and it had been infiltrated by different secret organisations, Republican organisations, like the Irish Republican Brotherhood. But it still remained largely focused on the idea of home rule rather than a republic being this ideal. And when the First World War broke out, the majority of these forces, 120,000 of them, ended up leaving to fight with Britain in the war against Germany.
So back then, home rule, just for people that might be not expert like yourself, home rule would have been the equivalent of the Scottish Parliament or the Welsh Assembly that we have in modern times now?
Yes. That would be something to that, akin to that.
What would have been wrong with that?
Well, you see, you have to, when you talk about the leaders in 1916, you're talking about people who were very well educated on the body politic of empire and what empire does and imperialism, and you know, you've got people like James Connolly. James Connolly has been in the British Army. He's been
interesting.
He's seen the Imperial War Machine.
I think Thomas Clark's father was also a British soldier. Is that correct?
I think he may well have been. A lot of these people would.
So they'd seen the reality.
Would have had members.
Okay,
yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Thomas Clark would have felt it.
Yeah.
Because he was in a prison, I think, in Portsmouth. Solitary confinement for over 16 years.
Yeah.
You know, he hated the British Empire with every fibre of his being. So he hated that British Empire, whether it's in Dublin or whether it's in New Delhi or whether it's in some other part of the world, you know. And it's this, and then of course, you know, James Connolly is part of a global socialist communist movement.
In fact, Roger Casement served in the army as well. He was Sir Roger Casement.
So I'm not sure about his original, about his early days, but I do know that he was he did work on behalf of the British Empire. So he did kind of like, I mean, he came to prominence over his. He went to Belgian Congo and he reported back on the crimes of the Belgian Congo.
In the chat, Triple T is saying down with the British Empire. Sorry to interrupt, Brian. Just someone's agreeing with us. Down with the British Empire. Yeah, most empires are by their very nature tyrannical.
All empires.
Yeah.
All empires.
Yeah.
But so this influenced them. So you had these three blocks of people. You had the loyalist bloc, the unionist bloc. Then you had the home rule bloc. That's also kind of, that could go either way. It was a very flexible group. They loved the pageantry of the royal family coming to Dublin, and then you had the die-hard Republicans that went back to 1788. They could trace back their ancestry to that. They're more rural. They're more out of the country, at the countryside.
Would there have been Would it be poorer people that would likely be more to that end of the spectrum?
I would say, like, the rank and file in Dublin of the Citizens' Army were poor people.
Okay.
The rank and file in the countryside of the volunteers who came out for 1916 would have been small-time farmers. Yeah, it would have been poorer. But the McDermott and Kent and them, they were well-read, well-educated. Count Joseph Plunkett, they were all, fairly well-educated. Countess Markovich, they would have people who would have had money. So Pierce would have had money.
Countess Markovich, who married a Polish man, I think, hence took his name. She was the first woman elected to the United Kingdom Parliament, as Ireland was all still part of the United Kingdom.
That's right. She never took her seat. And
abstentionist. That was something very much forgotten when we over here celebrated the 100-year anniversary of women having the vote. We didn't hear Countess Markovich be mentioned. Another, I'm proud to say, Irish Republican Protestant and a Sinn Féin woman. Maybe that's why she didn't get a mention.
Look, there's things in, British prefer to remember things that are convenient for them in terms of their history. They don't want to have a deep discussion about, why people rebel against them, or there's a terrible lack of talk about it, and it's a very uncomfortable conversation to have. It's a conversation that only happens when you're utterly defeated, like the Red Army running into Berlin, that kind of finally convinced a lot of Germans to kind of have a conversation about the kind of country they want to live in.
Yeah. I think some British are ready to have the conversation. I think Jeremy Corbyn showed signs that he was ready. Britain's done a lot of good and a lot of bad, and if you only look at the good, then you're just being biased.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, listen, culturally, I think Britain has given an awful lot to the world in terms of music and playwrights and comedy and movies, and I think that's where that's an enormous strength Britain has. But unfortunately, their history is one built upon the backs of poor, less developed countries. I mean, that's one thing. They came up against peoples who were in a different history hadn't allowed them to develop as quickly as England had, and they were crushed underneath the machine of British imperialism. But just going back to what you were saying, the sacrifice. I do think that it was in their minds. I think Pierce, more than anyone, he expected it, longed for it perhaps. He wanted it. He wanted that position. He wanted to be like Cuchulainn.
Really?
Yeah, he wanted to be like Cuchulainn.
Tell us who Cuchulainn is, this Irish mythological creature. So, he's a mythical god, was he? He was a hero that
he was the son died of a
standing
god,
up.
Yeah.
You go for it. Go on.
Yeah, so Cuchulainn was this famous, and he was a son of a god. He grew up in Ulster.
Yeah.
He was the main warrior for the King of Ulster, Conor MacNessa.
Yeah.
He was the hound of Cullen, hence his name, Cuchulainn. So Cuchulainn was this warrior who had these magical weapons made for him by the Celtic gods.
Wow.
And he defended Ulster against all invasions. And
this is why some of the Ulster loyalists like to claim him as their own, right?
They do.
He defended Ulster. That's kind of cute in a way. I like that.
It is nice. I like that. I like that they get that. But so the story goes, just to kind of give you, Queen Maeve of Connaught cast a spell that put all the fighting men of Ulster to sleep, except for Cuchulainn. So Cuchulainn was left to defend Ulster against all the men of Erin in a final horrific battle, and he slaughtered the the best of the men of Erin for 4 or 5 days.
Wow.
And it got to the stage where he couldn't stand up any longer, so he tied himself to a pillar or an old tree, so he could keep fighting.
Wow.
And eventually he stopped moving, and the crows began to pick at his flesh.
And that was the moment.
Only then, even then, the men of Erin were afraid to approach him in the case that he was still alive and they might get killed. So that's the story. It's an epic story of sacrifice. And then you combine that story with Jesus Christ and sacrifice of Jesus Christ, and you get into this. And not just Jesus, you go back and you talk about Wolfe Tone before, when he was arrested, he was going to be tried for...
Did Wolfe Tone take his own life before they could execute him?
He did.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is another sacrificial story, and you're right. It does run deep, and a lot of pagan stories. A lot of people criticize Christianity by saying, "Oh, there's pagan stories of sons of God who died and came back to life or sacrificed themselves." I think it's in the human spirit. Everyone has this story of sacrifice, and we apply it differently. Even in Muslims who reject the literal story of resurrection, they accept that Jesus suffered. To what extent we don't know, and there are other stories of Abraham being about to sacrifice his son, and then at the last minute, God says no. But it's this idea of being willing to make the sacrifice. Wolfe Tone was willing to make it, and the others.
And routed a lot of the time. There's certain parts of the Bible where the sacrifice doesn't seem to be rational, but Jesus' sacrifice, it seems like a rational. He's dealing with an oppressive society. He's dealing with colonialism. He's dealing with imperialism, and he's making this kind of sacrifice. So, from an Irish Republican perspective, you can co-opt that idea of sacrifice into your own narrative, into your own themes. Bobby Sands did the same.
I was about to say, right up into the 80s, and Bobby said,
absolutely.
I know I'm going to die, but I hope I'm the only one. I believe he said that at the start. I hope I'll be the only one.
Yeah, no, I would say that was. This is the thing about these movements. Once somebody has committed themselves to this being the final act, it's very hard to stop it. Because not only do you have you have this history behind you, almost pushing you in that direction. So it's almost impossible. Even if you wanted to, you couldn't stop yourself. Do you know what I mean? You can't stop what's going to happen.
The wheels are in motion.
The wheels are in motion, and you've got all this history behind you, running up behind you, and it's going to happen. And you just resign yourself to it. And I think,
oh man.
A lot of the volunteers who've kind of people, Terence McSweeney and
Thomas McSweeney was a hunger striker in the 20s.
Yeah.
During the war.
1920, I think it was, during the Black and Tan War.
Yeah.
The War of Independence, and he influenced a huge amount of people in anti-imperialist struggles across the world.
So
in India,
hunger striking has been in Irish republicanism for generations then.
Yeah, and I think it actually goes back. It's I've been reading up on this, and it actually goes back to the time of Cuchulainn, and it's been persistent in Irish culture throughout that period. When you perceived somebody had done you an injustice, you would go to their gate of their living area, and you would starve yourself to death until you received
and shame them into apologising,
shame them into addressing the injustice that was done on your clan or to you. A matter of honour, a matter of so it's been kind of through Irish history. It's always been there, and these men in the late 19th century, early 20th century would have been very affiliated with Irish cultural practices, because there was a huge part of the Republican movement was restoring Irish culture, which had been deemed to be this kind of barbarian, inferior culture in comparison to the British culture.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Andre McIntyre is commenting: the only people who've got a problem with the Brits are the conquered. Well.
Who's he?
Well, it's funny. He's a good friend actually, and I'm sure he's saying that tongue in cheek. His name is McIntyre, so he has speculated about having Irish ancestry, but he's Jamaican origin, as far as we know, with a bit of Irish thrown in there. You'll see him in a couple of videos. He's a Muay Thai fighter, and he does sometimes he does sometimes make the point that as much as he is against empire, he respects military people, and might is right sometimes. And if you are conquered, you should fight back. And the Irish did, and they won a degree of independence. What degree of independence do you think they won, Brian? Well, and I'm assuming you think it wasn't enough. Maybe it's still not enough.
The ideas of the 1960s. Well, here's the thing. Like, if you go back again, I'm going to go back to Connolly, because Connolly's my kind of person I would kind of go to on his writing, and because he wasn't just about Irish independence; it was about independence for human beings. It was you lived in a Dublin where there was extreme 20 families living in one dank house with no toilet facilities. Infant mortality was higher there than it was in many places in the empire.
So Ireland was one of the poorest countries in Europe, essentially, at that time.
Yeah, it was, yeah. And the infant mortality rate and people malnutrition. I mean, there wasn't any country in Europe where the population went decreased. Or the whole part, whatever happened in the 19th century, up into the 20th century, our population went from possibly 12 million people in around the 1840s to being 2 million people, almost 2.5, 3 million people by the end of the century. I mean, take immigration out of that, an awful lot of those people died from, died because of the injustices of capitalism and the injustices of mass production of food and things like that. But going back to I suppose what James Connolly said was that, we can remove the Union flag from Dublin Castle tomorrow. We can have a tricolour above it. But unless we remove their banks and their industry, their landowners, they'll still own us. And he was right.
Interesting.
And he's right, and that was a major component of the Civil War as well. There was an awful lot of people. We weren't going to accept, British still having bases in the country, which they did up until the 1930s. We weren't going to accept an oath of allegiance. Just wasn't. What were we fighting for? What was the point?
You remind me of something a friend of mine said. A chap of Pakistani origin, on commemorating the independence of Pakistan and freedom. He said, "Freedom from what?" It just meant our oppressor now had a brown face. He looked like us. To what extent is that the same in the Irish situation? Was there a new elite class? What happened?
Yeah, we created a whole new class, and they still control.
The class system prevailed.
I mean, there was you replaced the Protestant landed ascendancy with a Catholic landed ascendancy, who kind of nestled themselves into banking and all the capitalist machine of empire, and they've always been, they'd be this has been a bit private school, rugby, they play cricket, they would kind of get excited about an arrival of an English royal in Ireland, that kind of mentality.
This is what you refer to as West Brit, right?
The West Brit mentality, yeah. The West Brit mentality is nestled in capitalism.
Okay.
and neoliberalism, and
Okay.
it believes you don't find West Brits who are socialist or communist.
Okay.
You don't find West Brits that are for more equal distribution of wealth. They're part of an ascendancy that would have been the Quisling ascendance or class in Ireland during the times of the British Empire. Similar in India, the same thing happened in India. You had people in India who were quite happy with the Raj, and when the British left, they continued on with a similar lifestyle. They moved into positions that afforded them the same.
Yeah. I think
They're very good at manoeuvring themselves to transferring from one regime onto another regime.
colonization has always required some level of cooperation or capitulation from the locals. Otherwise, it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah.
They talk about
Yeah.
Ulsterization in the north. The occupation over there, as some would refer to it as, was perpetuated by letting the RUC do some of what the British would have done, and there was collusion also, as you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the RIC in the south was ostensibly Catholic. A lot of their officer corps, their G-men corps would have been.
So this is the Royal Irish Constabulary, the police force in the whole of Ireland prior to
for the whole
independence.
country,
Yeah, was.
And then, so like they were. Look, it was like anyone, you know what I mean? You're living in a society that's very poor and very agrarian.
But they were
And you get the
perpetuating British rule,
opportunity to
basically.
make decent money. They'll take it, you know what I mean? It's not, but it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. But it does mean you're dragged into the bloody work of empire, and that's what they did. They facilitated empire. And for that, they were generally hated and disliked.
Let's draw some parallels then, and I appreciate your time tonight, Brian. I don't want to take all of the rest of your Easter Sunday. You've made quite a sacrifice to our show. We appreciate it. When we met in Palestine quite a few years ago now, there was actually a hunger strike going on at the time. And a lot of parallels were being drawn between that and the Irish Republican hunger strikes. What you were saying about the RIC has resonated with me in terms of the PA, the Palestinian Authority, who administer the West Bank. To what extent are they a modern RIC? Are they just maintaining the status quo while paying lip service to this idea of being revolutionary and having Yasser Arafat's legacy? What do you see the parallels there being?
I think the parallel there is with the Irish Free State rather than the RIC.
Okay.
I think they are basically doing Britain's. In the case of Ireland, it was the IRA that were socialist and communist that could possibly bring about a Soviet type situation in Ireland, right on the doorstep of the British Empire, supported by a burgeoning, red state in Russia. That would be a terrible threat. So what better way, to control this troublesome bunch by arming the Free State and putting in. The Free State was made up of mainly people who hadn't fought in the War of Independence. A lot of them were ex-British Army. A lot of them were there was some TANs, there was some Black and Tans, there was some auxiliaries that took up there was an American guy who came over. There were American soldiers who came over for the pay. So British thought this was a good idea. We'll use these guys to police these guys.
Wow.
And we'll keep control of them, and they'll still be in the Commonwealth, and we have our strategic military ports, and all the land that belongs to our lords still belongs to them, and we'll also have everything we want. So we get everything we want without expending huge amounts of cash on subduing the population. This is what Israel applied. This is what the Israelis learned from history, and they applied the same ideal to the West Bank, and it worked. So you get the Palestinians to police themselves.
Wow. That's a much better comparison. Brian, look, we've got a caller on the other line, and I'm going to merge the calls, if you don't mind having a chat with this person. So we're going to play the phone call roulette now. We don't know who this is. Welcome. Who's there?
Hello, buddy, it's Toby. So I was just listening to what you were saying. Sorry, carry on making your point, Baz.
So, yeah, Toby, you're through to Brian.
Hello, go ahead, man.
Any question for Brian? We're talking sacrifice, or on the subject of sacrifice generally, if you want to go more general.
Well, yeah, I don't want to interrupt what you were saying, right? But I was just saying that the thing with sacrifice to me, and I don't know if I'm coming in, if it's all right to just sort of start talking, but sacrifice to me is a selfish thing, I reckon. Sacrifice
is a selfish thing. Not if you're dying for other people or sacrificing your life so that your country might be free. How could it be selfish?
Well, because I think a lot of the time people who do sacrifices, they're doing it because they feel good.
Yeah,
so
they
really,
want to go. They want to go down in history.
Because you feel good that you helped.
Do you think it's ego-driven?
Go on.
Brian's asking if you think it's ego-driven.
Well, yeah, exactly, and that's the thing. So anytime, for example, like I had to take the missus, she wanted me to do the shopping at Tesco because of obviously the whole COVID thing.
Yeah.
I went and did it, but I only did it knowing full well that it's going to make her happy, and her feeling happy made me feel happy. So it was like I did it for my happiness. Really, I wasn't doing it for her. If you know what I mean. Every decision we make is driven by either.
Well, it's a good point, Toby. We're going to go round in circles. But yeah, I guess you're asking, is any act truly selfless? Jesus said there's no greater act of love than to lay down your life for your fellow man or woman, if he was around these days. And what more can you say than that? Although if you're doing it to go to heaven, I suppose you've got a point, Toby. But this is why Buddha said you've got to let go of every desire, let go of all desires, including the desire to get to enlightenment, and then you'll get enlightenment. If that makes sense.
Look, motivation is the key thing you're talking about there. You're motivated to go to Tesco's to keep the missus happy.
Yeah.
And you made that sacrifice to keep her happy, which is totally understandable. I suppose if your motivation is to create a better society for your people, you're talking about a country where you had high infant mortality rate, you had destitution on a level that the poorest parts of Britain didn't pale in comparison to the poorest parts of Dublin and Cork and Waterford in terms of that. So, I mean, the people who made that sacrifice in Ireland, possibly, they're driven. I think Pearse was definitely driven by ego.
But you've got to have a bit of ego to be a good leader, I think,
Absolutely,
You've got to have a good ego. Look, we've still got Toby.
I get what he's saying. Yeah, I understand what he's saying.
Exactly. We've still got Toby, and we've got someone else joined us. Who's just joined? Hello, who's that?
Hi, so you caller.
Welcome back. Mac, have you got any question for Toby or Brian? I didn't think we'd get this many calls.
Basically, I've got something to weigh in.
Go on, weigh in. And then Toby, stand by, you can weigh back in if you want.
We say Ali says, be the flower that gives fragrance to the hand that destroys it as a form of sacrifice.
Say that one more time.
Basically, be the flower.
Be the flower.
That gives fragrance.
Yes.
Even to the hand that destroys it. So when you go and you grab a flower and you crush it in your hand just to smell it, be like that flower. Give something positive back. That is what Ali's philosophy or poetic ways of saying it is.
Oh, right.
So
that's
I want to weigh in and say, Jesus did say, slap me on the other cheek. He is that type of character, yes. But he's that sort of guy. Yeah, to go a step further, you could also say, be the flower that even when the hand destroys it, it gives positivity back. It gives fragrance back to the hand. So it's just a form of way of seeing it as well. That was just I thought I'll weigh in, and I didn't. But amazing conversation, good lads. I really appreciate everything that you've shown me and taught me.
Oh, thank you.
Can I just say that?
Yeah, Toby's
sorry,
back
but
that's beautiful what you just said there. I think that's really beautiful. My only issue with it, and I think everyone should be the flower that it's the fragrance when the hand takes it and that, but is that true sacrifice? Because the idea of sacrifice is giving up something greater, I guess, for something less. Now, what's greater than being the fragrant flower? Do you know what I mean? That's actually the greatest thing. So what you're getting is actually what you're doing, you're receiving greater than for a lesser. So is that really sacrifice?
Well, basically, what it is, if you're in a position and, well, if you want to be, because when you look at a flower, you're thinking amazing. That's the model to be. I mean, especially if it smells nice and it looks good. And then when you crush it, you destroyed its beauty.
Well, do you know what, Matt? Can I just pause you there?
I mean,
before I forget.
Rose might sting you with a thorn.
Well, just hold that thought, because before we lose touch with Brian, I want to ask him, as you mentioned flower, what is the Easter lily and what is the significance of it, and why did they choose that flower as we're talking flowers?
Very good question. Easter lily. The lily, it comes up over Easter, I think, in Ireland, you know.
Okay.
And I think that was the key for that. You know, it's that kind of early spring flower, if you get me. So I think that's where it came from. But it's again, different Republican groups have their own version of the lily, and we kind of, it's not like a poppy. It's different. You know what I mean? You don't have to wear it. You're not made. It's not like you don't see people wearing it on TV. It's something that, you know, if it's in your family, you wear, and if you want to show respect for Republican Day, you wear it. But it's not something that's kind of like, it's not like the poppy or the American flag.
Well, the poppy, the bigger the poppy you wear, the less of a damn you actually give. From my experience, they like to show that they respect the dead, but it's all a bit for show, and then there's this business every year about who wears a poppy, who doesn't. But you're saying the Easter lily would be more if it's something tied to your family and something special to you. Interesting.
Yeah, it's not a state thing. There's you won't see it on media in Ireland.
Interesting.
And there's no one kind of going to berate or lambaste anyone who doesn't want to wear it.
Okay.
It's a personal choice that you make.
It's a seasonal flower that comes up, and holly comes at winter. The lily grows in Easter. Easter is very much synonymous with this idea of things being reborn. One moment, Brian. One moment. Are there any of the flowers that Republicans would wear that have a symbolic? Some people wear a green ribbon. I've seen that. What is that, Sinn Féin?
Yeah, I think the ribbon is more so different groups. So like the Provisionals have the lily, Fianna Fáil have an Easter lily. The old what do you call them? The stickies. Who are the kind of.
I've heard this expression before. Someone mentioned it on the show. The stickies, was that the official IRA?
That was the official IRA. They had how they put their lapel, their lily lapel on their appendage on, was different to how a provisional one, and that's how people started calling them stickies and so on. It's just a bit stupid, like kind of a stupid thing between. Another problem with the Republican movement that they fracture all the time and splinter.
Yes, as do many groups. One more call, Brian. We're going to see who this is.
No bother.
Are you coming back in, Matt? All right, we liked your flower suggestion.
Flowers.
Yeah.
The Wars of the Roses.
The War of the Roses. Are we going all the way back to that? Yeah, absolutely. What was the War of the Roses? We got 5 minutes. Yeah, we got 5 minutes, gentlemen. So go War of the Roses if you want, Mac. And in the chat, Darren Musso is saying "Sticky Back Lily." Is that a reference to the group we just mentioned?
Could well be. I'm trying like that. There was one lily that you kind of put through on a pin. You put a pin on, And there was the other one that was just a sticky one.
There's lots of symbology. Someone else is also asking, before we go to Max, War of the Roses in the second hour of the show. Only joking. We're going to wrap it up on an hour. What? Oh, my question's gone. Oh, someone in the chat was saying, what do you think of the National Party in Ireland? I think Justin Barrett is a great leader. That's Celtic Crusader or Celtic Crusader. Well, you got Brian laughing. I think that tells you exactly what you need to know about that. Short answer, Brian, you don't like them.
Oh, listen, they're just a bunch of... I don't know if I can of worms there now. They're just a bunch, they want to be guardians or gatekeepers of Irish identity, and they don't encapsulate anything nice about Irish identity. Okay. Irish identity is about being welcoming and looking after people, and our culture is very strong, I think, and people, like a lot of the kids who are in my school who are from a Nigerian or a Muslim background or anything like that, they all play hurling. Okay. They all speak Irish. Great. And they all, like when we did a celebration in 1916 there in 2016, the boy who read out Aziz Alab, I'm not going to name him, nice kid, from Nigerian background, he read out a proclamation. Very proud moment for him and his father. So yeah, wonderful. I don't, Justin and all them. Wonderful. They can go. I don't like them. Yeah. That's answered that question. All right, Mac, you've got 3 minutes on the War of the Roses. Go for it. No repetitions, no arms, no R's.
I was interested in hearing what it was, what you lot were saying, but I was just going to add, talking of flowers, the history, the English history, which was obviously the wars. It's called the Wars of Roses, which obviously there was the House of the Plantagenets and the House of the Lancaster, and obviously, I was just, because we're talking about flowers. I don't know if you. But obviously, we're coming to the end of the show. Yeah, no, we're wrapping up.
Another night, we'll go all flowers.
I'm kind of rushing, trying to get everything in, but I'm saying things wrong as well because I'm in a state of. But yeah, I think it's a topic that we'd have to get into in depth, maybe another time, perhaps.
All right, we'll bring back to flowers another night. All right, Mac, I'm just going to finish things up with Brian. But you get in touch anytime you like.
No worries, but take care, guys.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Yeah, flowers are an interesting one. You got the poppy, you got the lily. He's talking about War of the Roses. What was the flower that Buddha thought was special?
That's a good question.
The lotus flower, I think. In the chat, Darren Musso is saying the Stickies used a sticky-backed lily, hence the name. Stickies, the others used the pin. Apparently the sticky back meant non-violence, more political. This goes back to what we were saying. So yeah, did the provisional IRA...
was it?
Yeah, this is Darren Musso, who earlier on mentioned, I think he was close friends with one of the hunger strikers, and if he wants to call another time, we'll do a whole show on that.
I'd listen to that.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Brian. Thank you so much, bud. I hope there's nothing we missed that you wanted to mention. I'll give you.
No, Jacobs. I hope that kind of filled in a few blanks.
Yeah, no, it's really good.
Didn't understand it.
Really good. Happy Easter to Bob the Builder, who's watching in the chat. He's a good Christian. Happy Easter. Yeah. All right, Brian. I will catch you offline soon, but thank you very much for
absolutely. Let's talk soon. You mind yourself and everyone over there. Take care of yourselves.
Wonderful.
God bless.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Slongerford.
Thank you. There goes Brian. Yeah, happy Easter, everyone. It's been absolutely superb to have you join me, and I'm trying to do as many of these as I can in the lockdown. I can't say we'll do it every night, but we'll do it most nights. Thank you, Darren Musso. He's saying he might get in touch to do a chat about the Easter... the hunger striker. Yeah, I wonder which of the hunger strikers he was friends with, because there's 10 names we could mention, and Bobby Sands obviously went first, but there were 9 others that followed him. That was a great sacrifice. Sorry it wasn't so interactive tonight in the chat. I'm sure you've all got sacrifices you've made. Maybe you've given something up for Lent. Maybe you've had to we've all had to make sacrifices because of the lockdown. And Darren Musso is saying that it was Sean McKenna, the hunger striker, that he's close friends with. Interesting. Okay, once again, if you haven't already, please subscribe. Please share this channel with someone else who would enjoy it. And we will do it all again soon, probably tomorrow night, probably at 10 o'clock. This has been Lessons for Life. We will do it all again soon. We were here and we are gone. Latest.